In this lesson, normal labor, we're going to learn what is normal, define some vocabulary, and then set some time points on what is considered normal, knowing that normal is going to be different for a first-time mom than a repeat customer. Let's start off with the stages of labor because I think that's going to put a lot of things into perspective, especially moving forward into the abnormal labor lecture. This is time, this is centimeters dilated. Labor begins with the onset of contractions. At this point, the cervix has not begun to change, and so the cervix will be dilated at 0 centimeters. The process of dilation of cervical change happens fairly slowly until it reaches a critical point. Once that critical point is reached, it's very quick to finish off dilating to maximum. Maximum is 10 centimeters. The number I want you to remember, this critical period, is 6 centimeters. 6 centimeters is the right answer. I'm going to make a big deal out of this once and then not touch it again. It used to be 4 centimeters. What's the difference? 4, 6. When we named that critical point at 4 centimeters, because that's what we had as best guess average, many women were getting procedures they didn't need. And if they just waited a little bit longer, it would have been a normal delivery. So we've changed it. We've redefined that critical point to 6 centimeters. Now, because this is still in contention, the test can't give you a value between 4 and 6. So either you're going to see less than 4 or greater than 6. They can't give you something in between. And the other thing is when you measure, you're really just kind of reaching in there and spreading your fingers and then kind of judge based on what you know your hand to do. So it's not hyper-specific, 4 centimeters, 6 centimeters, but the point is that the beginning phase is going to take a little bit longer, and then once you reach 6, things should progress fairly quickly. 6 centimeters is what you want to remember. This is stage 1, what we described so far. And stage 1 is divided into a latent phase, that is 0 centimeters, onset of contractions, to dilation to that critical point, 6 centimeters. Stage 1 active phase is the process by which the cervix dilates from 6 centimeters to maximal dilation of 10 centimeters. Stage 2, from maximal dilation of 10 centimeters to the delivery of the fetus. And stage 3, delivery of the fetus to delivery of the placenta. And even though it's technically not a stage, I like to use it to remind us that there's still care that needs to happen after delivery is over. Stage 4 is the end. Let's define some of the norms. A first-time mom is allowed to take longer than a repeat customer. Stage 1 latent phase is normal if it takes less than 20 hours in a nulliparous mom and 14 hours in a multi. We're going to use N and M for nulli and multi as we go down this list. The active phase, you should see cervical change, cervical dilation at a rate of 1.2 centimeters per hour for a nulli and 1.5 centimeters per hour for a multi. We don't really use this anymore clinically. The idea is to show you that nulliparous moms take longer. Multiparous moms should go faster. Just as we try to measure cervical dilation, it's very challenging to measure 0.3 centimeters with your hands. It's not like you can take a tape measure and put it up there. So as you'll see in abnormal labor, we don't really use these anymore, and you probably won't get a question about it, but you might get pimped by someone who knows a lot about delivery. Stage 2, 10 centimeters to the fetus being delivered, should take 3 hours for a nulli and 2 hours for a multi. And fetus to placenta, regardless of how many times you've delivered, should take less than 30 minutes. And so we've been talking about cervical dilation, and that's one of the big things that comes up in the pathophysiology questions, is going to be, how do you get cervical change? And the cervix goes from a fairly rigid, elongated structure, like your nose, to a fairly loose, floppy, and dilated structure, like your lips. And it does so really fast. The way it's able to do that is breakage of disulfide bonds. It's the breakage of disulfide bonds that question writers like so much. With infusion of water. The words we use to describe the change are going to be softening, effacement, dilation, and position. It literally becomes softer. Effacement means gets shorter. Dilation means gets wider. And position means actually aims the cervix so that baby shoots out in an adventitious direction. So these things are designed to help baby get out. These things happen because of fetal head engagement. As contractions force baby into the cervix responds to the pressure by changing and doing these things. As we'll discuss in abnormal labor, you can simulate this process with a balloon or with medications, like prostaglandins, or help out the contractions with oxytocin. More on this in abnormal labor. But in addition to the cervix, you also need to know or be able to describe where baby is and in what position baby is. The first is called fetal station. Where is the fetus relative to coming out of mom? The landmarks you're going to use for this are the ischial spines. They're usually very easily palpated, and the ischial spine itself is considered 0. If baby's head is more in mom's uterus, it's said to be negative. If it's more towards the outside world, towards the vaginal opening, it's said to be positive. Now, we used to use this more subjective system, +3 to -3. The idea being, it's almost out, it's almost there, oh, it's really far back there. This is a more objective way of doing it with one caveat. I'll show you at the end. The new way of doing it, -5 to +5, is the number of centimeters that baby is from that landmark. Now, this presumes then that all women are 5 centimeters long. We know that's not true, but the point is that you can get an objective measurement from the ischial spines to decide how far baby is in the process. The idea being, the more negative the station, the more likely you are to use C-section to get baby out. The more positive baby is, the more likely you are to grab hold with something and just pull. The last thing I want to talk about is fetal position and breech. In order to demonstrate the different types of presentations, I need to draw mom 3 times. It doesn't really matter what mom looks like here, only that her axial skeleton is up and down on the board. That is, the path of her spine is up and down. The right way, the way you expect it to happen, is called longitudinal cephalic. That is, baby's axial skeleton is in line with mom's, and the head is down. Now that looks upside down on the board, but really that's the way you want to do it. You want baby's head to engage the cervix, cause opening, and baby comes out. Longitudinal means in alignment with mom. Cephalic means head first. One type of breech birth would be a longitudinal breech birth. Longitudinal, axial skeleton is in alignment, but the head is in the wrong direction. And then if you're not in line with mom's axial skeleton, instead you're perpendicular, this is called transverse. The way you can assess fetal position is something that should be done all the time. At week 37, you do what's called a Leopold maneuver. And the fetal position is literally just a clinical diagnosis. You put your hands and you find out where the head is. But because they become so accessible and they're pretty cheap without any radiation, you can use ultrasound to prove to yourself that you know what the orientation of baby is. If you hear breech birth, what I want you to learn is section. Breech birth equals section. There's times where you don't have to do this, but what I want you to remember is breech birth C-section. One of those times is when you have an abnormal lie. You can do what's called an external version. That is, with your hands from the outside, just twist baby around inside mom. Now they might snap back to abnormal position, but that's okay. It's a free maneuver, and if baby comes out in a normal delivery, you've spared a C-section. The other time you might not do a C-section is with multiple gestations, where the first gestation is engaged the right way. You deliver the first one, then you C-section the second one. Before we finish, I want to talk about different names of breech based on the hips and knees flexions. This is probably not going to be a test question, but is great for pimp fodder. These are baby's legs. This first one is called a frank breech. The second is called complete. The third is called footling. It has to do primarily with what the hips are doing and what the knees are doing. In a frank breech, their hips are going to be flexed, and the knees are not bent, so they are extended. In a complete breech, the hips are still flexed, but now the knees are bent, so they too are flexed. In footling, it doesn't matter what the knee is doing, only that the hip is extended, which is why I've drawn both feet in different positions. This was normal labor and a little bit about breech. There's a lot you got to know. Be able to identify the stages and what's normal. 6 centimeters is what you want to commit to memory. Stage 1 latent, 20 hours nully, 14 multi. Stage 1 active, 1.2 centimeters per hour nully, 1.5 centimeters per hour multi. Stage 2, 10 centimeters to fetus, 3 hours nully, 2 hours multi. Stage 3, fetus to placenta, 30 minutes. Be able to identify fetal station and what that means. C-section if you're negative, vaginal operative delivery if you're positive, and then also don't forget about breakage of disulfide bonds because that is a board favorite. That is normal labor.